Okay, it is my pleasure to introduce our next panel on the topic of industry views on quantum science. We have Ms. Lisa Lambert, CEO of Quantum Industry Canada, Mrs. Freeke Heijman, Vice President at the European Quantum Industry Consortium, Dr. Celia Merzbacher, Executive Director of the Quantum Economic Development Consortium, and Dr. Constanza Vidal Bustamante, Fellow Technology and National Security at the Center for a New American Security. Before they come out, I do have one exciting update to welcome an announcement for a competition next year.
All right, thank you. We were just conferring backstage. I actually got to meet the student, so I was very, very, pleased to know that high school students and maybe even younger are very excited about quantum. So I'm pleased to announce, I'm Emma Wong from the Electric Power Research Institute, that in 2026, we will be partnering with Quantum World Congress on our next challenge. So stay tuned on what that topic will be. And we want all quantum people who are interested from middle school to high school to college to even big companies to apply. So stay tuned. Thank you, and I think we're moving to the panel.
All right. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, I'm on? Okay, great. Well, it's my pleasure to be here with these wonderful panelists and to have a really engaging discussion. We only have 30 minutes, so I'm gonna go right into it so we get to a lot of the substance and I'm sure to get to all the topics that you all want to hear about. So let's start setting some foundation and for the audience and for all of us to be up to speed on what the latest developments have been on the strategies for quantum around the world. So maybe I'll have you, let's go in order and kind of, if you can recap for us what status we are on the latest strategies for quantum in the United States, in Europe, and in Canada, and kind of how you, as a leader of one of these industry consortia, are weighing in on that conversation and trying to influence those strategies. So
thank you,
we'll
Constanza.
start with Celia.
So I'm Celia Merzbacher. I'm Executive Director of the Quantum Economic Development Consortium, or QED-C, which is based here in the US, was called for by the National Quantum Initiative Act, but is now open to international membership and participation from companies and organizations, research organizations from now some 20 different countries are members of the consortium. But we are US sort of centric, and we work closely with the US government to provide the industry perspective as they do their own prioritization and strategy developments. I don't represent the government, I just want to be very clear about that. But there's clearly in the quantum space a very important bridge that needs to exist between industry and government. Governments are covering the cost of the very early stage research, the scientific advances, the education of students who then go and work for industry, of course. And so we provide input on what the policy decisions mean to industry. And those policy decisions may be where investments are being made, where skills are being brought into the education programs, where the needs are for the industry. We can sort of give the information about where the gaps exist. It's then up to the government policymakers to decide where to make investments. The US has a strong interagency coordination program, so I think there's quite robust communication among the different parts of the government. And of course, in the US, there's a lot of different parts of government that fund science and technology. So it's working pretty well, I would say. We're excited that the Congress may be passing the reauthorization of the National Quantum Initiative Act, which I think sends a strong signal of support by government and from the highest levels. So we're looking forward to that, and again, providing the industry perspective as those discussions are happening.
Yeah, great, thank you, Celia. So,
yeah, so hi.
Lots of exciting developments from Europe recently.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm Vice President of the European Quantum Industry Consortium. It's sort of the equal of QED-C in Europe in a way. We are quite busy at the moment because as you probably all have seen, the European Commission launched its quantum strategy just before summer, which is quite a comprehensive approach for the next years to bring quantum to the next level. And the key priority is to build European champions, so scaling industry and scaling startups and scale-ups to becoming unicorns. And there, yeah, QUIC is the sort of the primary industry voice towards the European Commission, and we have recently published a position paper as a response to the strategy with the priorities and sort of attention points, etc. Because this strategy, it's a good step and there's lots in it, but it needs some further detailing in the next couple of months because it's a starting point for the Quantum Act. So Europe is preparing in analog to the CHIPS Act, but now Quantum Act, so that will also be the sort of legal framework to implement the strategy. So discussions are underway with the European Commission on how to take the necessary steps on the implementation. And yeah, we got to this position paper. It's a very inclusive process of all the members. So really everyone could volunteer to, each member could volunteer to be part of a group to define the response to the chapters of the quantum strategy. So for instance, our key priority is how to crowd in private capital, so ideas and really stressing the importance of certain initiatives there, such as the 28th regime that is also underway, which makes it easier for companies to have a European label and therefore yeah, scale in an easier way. Because yeah, in Europe, one of the big issues, of course, is fragmentation. You have all the member states, and they all have their national policies as well. And as the companies scale, there is much more needed also to make sure that, yeah, intra-European M&A becomes possible. So these kind of topics are top on our list, and yeah.
Thank you. And we'll wrap up this question with Lisa about Canada.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Lisa Lambert. I'm the CEO of Quantum Industry Canada, or QIC for short, and we are the Canadian industry-led Quantum Consortium. It's been an interesting time over in Canada right now, and I will maybe start with saying I don't work for the government. And we do have the Director of our National Quantum Strategy, Michael Rosenblatt, who is here as well and speaking tomorrow, who can provide the government perspective as well on where things go. We're very grateful to have a good working relationship with our government and going back for a long time, and QIC has some support also through our National Quantum Strategy that came out back in 2023, was announced back in 2021, and I think everyone here can see, and through the conversations going on, quantum is moving quickly, and the context has shifted very quickly from an industrial perspective in the last year, let alone the last couple of years as well. So I think there's a recognition with Canada being one of the first countries to put out a national quantum strategy, in Canada having been working on quantum for decades right now. Even that 2023 NQS is due for a little bit of a refresh to look at what the context is today and what's moving forward with that. So we've been working very closely with our community. We've got a network of about 70 organizations in Canada, getting their perspective. And our community represents all sectors, verticals of quantum technology right across the value chain, also post-quantum cryptography as well, which is quite a relevant conversation in Canada. There was a roadmap that came out at the end of June with this. We've been working to bring those voices together and find out what are the community's needs right now, what is the industry's needs to go to that next level and put that forward. We're expecting a budget in Canada coming out this fall later on, which I'm really looking forward to. So we put in a pre-budget submission for that as well on behalf of the community, and that's on our website if anyone's curious to look at and see what the industry perspective is on that side. So working to champion that and see what some of the opportunities are. And then also there's another quantum strategy in Canada called Quantum 2030 that's on the defense side as well, that's got 4 missions aligned with that. So we've been in conversations on the defense side as well and with industry and looking at where industry can be a real partner in supporting those missions going forward, as we're expecting some defense investments to be coming out, and then also looking at the broader context where Canada can be contributing some of our expertise and capabilities to the different security and defense alliances that we're a part of as well.
Yeah, thank you. So it seems like it's a very timely opportunity across these ecosystems for industry to be weighing in as these decisions are being made, sometimes for the next 5 years or so, right? So it's an important time to be weighing in. And I think one theme that cuts across what you said and what I've read about your proposals that you have for your respective regions is the need for industrialization and to really support these companies that might be early stage still in maturing these technologies and getting to commercial products. And of course, a lot of that requires sufficient investments and capital. I was curious to hear from you what specific mechanisms like mission-driven procurements, scale-up funds. Freeke, you mentioned a lot of private sector investment, but in the US at least, there's also a lot of talk, and I think this is true for everybody, about having the government serve as an early customer as well. So could you maybe tell us a bit more about what you think might be specific procurement mechanisms or other mechanisms and specific subsets of technologies that might be the most ripe for these kinds of investments that might yield high returns on investment for the next few years? Maybe we can start with Lisa and then come back.
Yeah, it's an interesting one to look at, and I think with government, I'm mindful sometimes of not being overly prescriptive because there's a different set of tools within government, and it's a big enterprise, and leaving the space for where that can look at or be engaging in some of those areas. But I think there's some really good examples to be looking at for procurement. And I think for this technology, and this conversation is coming up more and more is around the defense side for this as well. And I think traditionally when we look at deep tech and we look at semiconductors, we look at GPS, we look at the internet, defense has been a big driver with this. They're a good, stable customer. There's a sense of urgency within that moving forward. There's a sense of scale that can come through. So I think there's a nice fit on that side. I think there's also some good shows from support with NATO's quantum strategy in other areas as well. You know, being in North America, looking at the NORAD context and NORAD modernization, there's some real capabilities that could be coming into that side. So I think that is a good fit to be looking at where those areas are. And I think also right now, from the context of defense, if you look at where's the leading edge of these capabilities, it's not in government, it's not even in universities, it's in industry. And I think in the context of government, for them to be partnering at that frontier edge and being able to prevent strategic surprise, they've got to be working with industry on that piece. And that procurement development towards that is a really good channel to look at. And you can put in pre-procurement elements where it's, you've got an out along the way to help de-risk as that technology goes forward. So I think that's a key piece. I also think a really important part of this conversation, whether it's in the defense context or in the commercial case, is that quantum right now, it's not a free market that's in this, where we're looking at the public funding that's going into this and the public procurement piece. So there's a role with government coming in, and as we're looking at what's happening in the public markets today and other places, where government, it's not to carry these over, but government can really play a catalytic role in stimulating the industry and crowding in private investment and other developments going forward. So I think any elements of that, procurement is one tool, CapEx investments, there's other ways to be looking at some of these elements where government can come in, play that catalytic role, de-risk some things for other private sector funding, and to scale out that investment. And I think that's a really important vehicle to be looking at from a creative financial lens as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so in the quantum strategy, there are several routes that are really highlighted to fund these companies. So it's procurement, so getting from grants more to procurement, and that trend has already been set in, and we're going to see it even more. And then it's not only procurement from big systems with big consortia, but also really targeted at the component level, targeted at the supply chain. So QIC really feels strongly about not only funding large consortia, because that can be very time-consuming and also not efficient, and making sure that also single or two company consortia can get funding. So that's one, and the other one is challenge-based. So yeah, there's going to be a new approach for grant challenges to really get to certain technical requirements and get that funded in a way. And QIC is with the European Commission setting out the sort of the framework for these goals.
What do you think, Celia?
I think, well, the U.S. governments often think similarly, and we have a sort of a similar approach, I think, in the U.S. There's hasn't been really an appetite to go out and buy systems. There is a proposed program, the QUEST program, to provide some funding for researchers to access private systems that hasn't been appropriated, but that would be one way that the government could put a little bit of fuel into the system and be an early customer in a sense. We do have existing programs that provide seed funding like the SBIR, Small Business Innovation Research Program. There's a relatively new Office of Strategic Capital that is aimed at providing loans and loan guarantees in areas that are considered strategic, including quantum computing, among others. So there are a number of financial assistance vehicles, you could say. And I think that the government, we always focus a little bit on spending money to either do procurement or to fund R&D, but there's also a lot of ways that the government can incentivize the private sector to get more involved, get off the sidelines, and invest in an area. And so whether it's through some kind of a matching or challenge programs that small companies could use to get access to private capital to go after some prize, it has to be significant, at the right level, I think are all under consideration. And I think because the technology is steadily improving, government is becoming sort of more willing to take some of those steps. In the US, there's always this sort of mantra that we don't want to pick winners. And right now it seems like there's a lot of competition, and so there's a reluctance to invest in any one particular technology. So sooner or later, there's going to be a capability that the government is going to say, yeah, I'll get behind that because it's going to provide something of value. And I do see applications and use cases in defense and space and energy and critical infrastructure that are the domain of government where some of these applications and investments might be made.
Yeah, thank you all. So I wanted to also ask you about workforce, which is usually one of the main pillars of these quantum strategies across regions. And we heard this morning from OSTB Director Michael Grazius that workforce was, I think he named it as the first of the priority areas that he's thinking about for quantum in the United States, but I think it is an area where most strategies devote quite a bit of attention to. So I was curious to hear from you how you see the workforce question and how your respective regions are approaching that. And I think there's increasing awareness that the quantum workforce doesn't just necessitate PhD level individuals, but increasingly so as these technologies mature, like you were saying, Celia, as well. You need all sorts of backgrounds to come to it, and maybe it doesn't require even a 4-year degree. Maybe you can do some apprenticeships and other programs. How are your ecosystems dealing with this? And I think especially at a time where we want to encourage more people to join the workforce, and we expect that we will need more people to join, but at the same time we want to be cautious with technology development cycles and not over-promising, I guess, before we really know how many people we really need to join the workforce and what specific skills and abilities and profiles essentially we want to bring in. Maybe we can have Freeke start this time.
Yeah, so broadening the talent pool, I think, is a challenge for all of the geographies and get the talent in. And Europe is very open also to sort of get the talent that is needed to build this workforce. So there are several, strategic initiatives on that, including the financial means to make it possible to attract talent. In Europe, of course, there's also the different member states. So what we see is more and more the European university model, where there's exchange programs and some courses shared with institutions within Europe. And I think that's a very promising development as well, because in the end, if a person gets a degree somewhere, you want it to be able to work at ASML in the Netherlands or at a quantum company in France, and that it's, the European capability and culture gets built up from a young age.
I will point to a couple of sources of data. I'm always data-driven when possible. One is a study that's been several years since we did it, but I don't think the results would be different today. We surveyed the QED-C members and asked them, what jobs are you going to be filling? What skills do you want those people to have? And what degrees would you expect or want them to have? And the results showed that most of the skills didn't say quantum. They were software engineer, photonic specialist, and so on. And some of them were business skills that were needed. The degree that was preferred was generally not a PhD, but a master's or undergraduate, or even a sort of associate or a technician type degree. So I think the message there is that we need to communicate the breadth of skills that are needed and get the learners, the young people who may have some of that already under their belt. The conclusion was that you don't need a quantum degree, you need a traditional degree perhaps with some quantum understanding added to your training or your education. I think in the short term for QED-C members, while the sort of attracting students, young people who are in pre-college education into this area and encouraging them to stick with their math and so on, that's going to take a while to have the pipeline develop. So we need to be giving upskilling and reskilling to the current workers in engineering fields and so on so that they can move into this field if they're interested. And finally, there was a report that we put out in March on the state of the quantum industry, the state of the quantum economy. And one measure, of course, of an economy is the number of jobs. And so you can find this report easily on the QED-C website in our reports section. And it gives information about job openings and the number in the workforce. So you can kind of get a sense of the scale. Because to your point, it's not as big as medicine or some other fields yet, but we're going to continue to update those numbers, and so that's another place to sort of get a sense of the growth of the sector.
Lisa, do you want to add
I think a couple similar things with this. So we also do a survey with our members. We're getting ready to do the next one as well, is looking at what are they planning, what areas are they planning to hire in over the next year or so, and understanding that landscape. What we've seen over, it's a short time scale, but even just the last couple of years, an interesting note we've seen a change has been a lot more interest around roles like product management. Coming up, and more on the technician side and others. We've got more and more of our companies that are hiring directly out of polytechnics or trade schools in Canada as well, and we've got some more engagement. I'm getting more outreach now actually from our polytechnics and trade schools saying, hey, should we be thinking about quantum and thinking about potentially offering some kind of specialties or other pieces? So I think that's an interesting shift that's been happening moving forward. There was a time with Canada, up until recently actually, that about 1/3 of the global quantum workforce had trained through Canada in some ways, which is interesting to see. And I'm sure if you look around the room, around this event, most of the companies here have at least one Canadian working for them in this space, but there's still more that's needed in that pipeline development. We've been really excited to see some more universities bring online quantum programs and go from there, but really trying to think of how are we building for what's there tomorrow. And I think that awareness piece for people to realize this is a real industry that's coming together. There's a lot of options within this. And I think the other side that we look at is looking at talent mobility as well. And where are we looking to be able to bring in the skills that we need and come forward, whether that's coming from out of country, but something else that we're looking at in Canada as well is from sectors that are shifting over or seeing some change where there might be skill sets that they can bring in. So we've got another couple companies, for example, that they're hiring a lot of technicians or tradespeople out of the oil patch in Canada and bringing them into quantum. So it's interesting to see some of the lateral movement that's coming over that's certainly not a PhD physicist, but bringing a very different, much needed skill set into the workforce. So I'm excited to see where it's going to go, and we're trying to track that again from a data perspective to see where we can inform and be a resource to help the broader community and stakeholders that we all need to come together to build out the industry.
Yeah, and that's a great segue to my next question. So your associations co-created the International Council of Quantum Industry Associations, or ICQIA, I guess you guys go by that acronym, a few years back to basically acknowledge the global nature of the quantum ecosystem, right? And to coordinate on various aspects of that sector across, standards, IP, supply chains, market access, and so on. And Freeke, just recently you published as well with others a report on supply chains and kind of assessing this global landscape and areas in which, as a global ecosystem, we might have some shared potential choke points and weaknesses and areas of improvement. Can you give us perhaps some key takeaways from that? And I think importantly, not just what the bottlenecks are, but ways in which we could then mitigate those risks.
Yeah, so that was a study we did for NATO, so the Transatlantic Alliance. So there we mapped the supply chain for all quantum technologies, starting with computing and really going from all enabling technologies, the materials, the cryogenics, the lasers, etc. And there, what we found is that some and even many of those vulnerabilities we share. So it's not like Europe has these vulnerabilities and the US has those vulnerabilities and they're completely opposite. A lot of them are shared. And that's also a key takeaway, is that it is very wise to collaborate on that, because in the end there are adversaries outside of this alliance that we have. And if we all want to do everything on our own, we are not going to win this, because our supply chains are very much intertwined already, because that's another takeaway from this report. Many of those vulnerabilities come from the semiconductor supply chain. They're similar. So in that sense, I think it's a clear message that we should work together on this supply chain vulnerabilities, as the allied nations, I would say.
Absolutely, and I think both QED-C and QUIC in Europe have also released statements kind of warning against fragmentation, right, among like-minded countries, among allied countries and partners. To recognize that, you know, we have shared geopolitical adversaries and risks, and that perhaps we're not doing ourselves any favors by creating additional fragmentation among like-minded countries. So I think we have just a few minutes to end. I wonder if you could all share a few thoughts on what you think we can do to avoid that scenario, and we can continue to ensure reciprocity across our ecosystems and ensure that we're working together toward a shared goal, such that we can really together collectively reap the security and economic benefits that we know these quantum technologies will bring. Celia, do you want to get us started?
Sure. So I think that ultimately, on the industry side, not surprisingly, they want as little sort of friction and barrier to accessing markets and suppliers and talent as possible, recognizing that there are geopolitical and national interests that come into play. And so while it's important and necessary to have certain controls, they should be targeted and to the minimum needed to achieve the goals of the program or the national interest. And because those interests are so common among allies, there should be reciprocity arrangements. And an example of that is the US export controls that were implemented a year ago, where they indicated that you would need to have a license to export certain technologies unless the country you are exporting to had similar controls. And that's an incentive for other partners to kind of get inside the wall and be part of the group. And I think those kinds of arrangements are very helpful to industry. So I would encourage more of those kinds of arrangements, and ultimately, there might be some agreement whereby, you had some kind of free trade among identified allies. But there are steps along the way, like the export control agreements, that can be put in place. Maybe some, quantum visa program or something. A number of opportunities that would make it easier for industry to do business and move faster.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would like to echo what Celia has been saying. So indeed, export controls. And yesterday at the International Forum, we discussed the option of an economic zone, a free economic zone. Of course, that's something to strive for, but we can really take steps along that way, because in the end, if we want our companies to scale and to be successful, they need to be able to sell throughout the world and do business. So I think it's good. You see, for instance, Q-Blocks, they just established an office in Boston and the other way around. So that's also something I think we should stimulate among our members.
Mm-hmm. Lisa, final words from you.
Yeah, I think I think something to consider is that industry looks at borders quite a bit differently than governments do, and we need to be looking at, how are we shaping pathways for business to happen amongst trusted allies. These supply chains are really complex, and I think right now in a world where sovereignty is a word I keep hearing more and more and more, where we're looking at these nascent, emerging, very fragile supply chains, the global value chain, we've got to keep in mind that sovereignty doesn't equal solitude. We've got to really be working together as trusted allies to bring this industry, and the industry is still really fragile as we're moving forward with this as well. So where we can be working together, and I think our organization, the partnerships that we have with Q-Star as well over in Japan and other consortiums is a really good foundation to help facilitate that and have the global industry playing together.
Well, I want to thank you, all of you, for everything you shared, and to the audience for listening. And I'm sure we'll continue this discussion. So thank you all.
Thank you.